Rand Paul is certainly his father's son. He's reintroducing the Audit the Fed Act. And of course, this is from January, but we're going to discuss a more recent article from Ron Paul as well. Ron is 88 years old and he's still fighting the Fed just like he did in the early days. Of course, he's always been an athlete, right? A baseball player, hit a home run in a congressional game. I think still the only guy to do it. But anyways, Rand Paul introduced this bill to audit the Fed, which we'd love to do. If not, end the Fed. We'd love to see one of the Pauls get elected as president. That would be amazing. It's kind of unfortunate. I mean, I feel great for Argentina, but it's hardly fair that Milei was elected before we could get a Paul in the White House. But, there's always the future. There's always 2028. Ron Paul will still be around, but maybe Rand Paul would be the more realistic option. And then we could get rid of the Federal Reserve and get a little more involved in, I don't know, cryptocurrency, at least on our own time. Not a Fed coin, though. We don't want that. So it says here, no institution holds more power over the future of the American economy and the value of our savings than the Federal Reserve, said Dr. Paul. It's long past time for Congress to stop shirking its duty and hold the Federal Reserve accountable. That is so true, right? Inflation is the secret tax, right? So the governments can promise us things it can't afford and then inflate away our purchasing power so that they can pay their bills more easily. And a lot of great people have backed this bill as well. I'm a huge fan of Mike Lee and Ted Cruz. They're great, and there's some other great guys on that list as well that you may prefer. Let me know in the comments if you how you feel about all of those other people. It says here this legislation would require the nonpartisan, independent Government Accountability Office. Those guys either are overworked or really not doing their job in accounting for government budgetary concerns. To conduct a thorough audit of the Federal Reserve's Board of Governors and the reserve banks within 1 year of the bill's enactment, and to report back to Congress within 90 days of completing the audit. And you know what? Let's remember during the big financial crisis of 2008, the Great Recession, they were sending money to foreign banks. The U.S. taxpayer was subsidizing the survival of rich banks in Europe. A lot of people have forgotten about that by now. I haven't forgotten, and I hope that Americans haven't completely forgotten either, but I fear they have. Audit the Fed would repeal current statutory restrictions that prevent a full audit of the Fed and Fed banks. If enacted into law, the bill would empower the GAO to fully audit transactions foreign or within a foreign central bank. Okay, that's the key right there, foreign central bank. So somebody's still paying attention. Government of a foreign country or non-private international financing organizations. Deliberations, decisions, or actions on monetary policy matters, including discount window operations, reserves of member banks, securities credit, interests on deposits, and open market operations. Also, transactions made under the direction of the Federal Open Market Committee, discussions on communications among or between members of the board. That'd be good, especially if they're trying to bribe their way into foreign powers. I don't know if they're getting kickbacks, but maybe we should do some audits of their personal finances to find that out. It seems like that's what's happening in the medical field, as we discussed in one of our previous videos. So, this is a great article. I would love to see this go through. We've been talking about auditing the Fed for a long, long time, and hopefully someday it will actually happen. Unfortunately, as it says in this article written by Ron Paul, Joe Biden is going in the completely wrong direction. He wants to outlaw shrinkflation. Well, here's the thing about consumers. They are price conscious, right? You go to the store, you want the best item at the best price, and the corporations are aware of that. But as their goods and services become more expensive to purchase, they have to pass those costs on to consumers, and that's what happens. But it really starts with the Fed printing money that it doesn't have to loan to the government, where the politicians make promises they can't follow through on. So, part of us are part of the problem where we ask the government to save us from recessions. Unfortunately, Americans can't be bothered to understand the absolute basics of economics or of personal finance. But, the public schools aren't helping there. They don't teach people any of that. So it's unfortunate. Ron Paul writes President Joe Biden may have recently made history as the first president to discuss snack chips in the annual State of the Union message. He used snack chips to illustrate the phenomenon of shrinkflation. Like, less chips in your bag of chips or your Snickers bar being slightly smaller than before. And it is true that's happened over the past 20 years, but it's also true that we've had a huge amount of inflation during that time period as well. When I was younger, candy bars were 60 cents. Now they're sometimes over $2. If you're older than me, you might remember 10-cent candy bars or what have you. Shrinkflation occurs when businesses reduce the amount of goods sold in order to avoid raising prices. Okay? Because again, you go to the store and you're like, why is everything more expensive? What's causing this to happen? People get mad at the corporations. About 20%, probably entirely Democrats, believe that corporations cause inflation, but that couldn't be further from the truth. Companies are at the end of the line. They've bought all these goods to produce the items that they sell, and then they're forced to raise prices. So that's the last part of the train of shrinkflation. President Biden pointed out that businesses hope that since both the price and the size of the package remain the same, most consumers will not notice they are getting fewer chips, cookies, or whatever other product has been affected by shrinkflation. Biden called on Congress to pass legislation sponsored by so called moderate Senator Bob Casey to crack down on companies reducing the amount of goods in a package. What a ridiculous thing to outlaw. How much government control do they want over food? This has been it's just been getting worse and worse for a century. I'm not going to get into, Hoover and FDR, but they tried to take over the farming industry, and they went way too far. And nowadays we still pay farmers not to farm. But anyways, Biden and his congressional allies and media apologists think that this will stop shrinkflation. They think this is because they think this because they believe shrinkflation is caused by corporate greed, which couldn't be further from the truth. In fact, shrinkflation is a rational response to increased prices caused by Federal Reserve's dollar depreciation, which has been going on since it was founded, right? Since the very beginning, and they've caused massive amounts of shrinkflation. And as Milton Friedman points out, they are the cause of the business cycle. The Fed creates bubbles. Eventually, the bubbles pop, which leads to inflation. Then people come beg the government or the Fed to save them again. The Fed spends a bunch of money, creates a new bubble, and the cycle continues. Businesses reduce the amount of products sold as means to cope with rising prices of materials needed to make their products without directly raising the price paid by consumers. Unless greed is the only human emotion that fluctuates with the Fed's policies, the fact that shrinkflation only occurs when Federal Reserve policies cause major price inflation should show anyone willing to think logically about these issues that the Fed, not greedy businesses, cause shrinkflation. Making shrinkflation a federal crime, that's insane, would force more businesses to increase their prices. This would give the American people a more accurate picture of how the Fed's price inflation is affecting their standard of living. Right? Everything gets more expensive. Everything the government is involved in gets more expensive. Just look at housing, medical, and education. Those are three industries that are unbelievably negatively influenced by the state, and they have increased dramatically in price, whereas many other things have gone down in price over time, adjusted for inflation. Inflation's existence indicates that the impact of inflation is well above the Consumer Price Index's report of a 3.2% increase in prices over the past. That's a good point. CPI is not the perfect indicator of what's actually happening in the economy. If Biden wanted to stop inflation, he would start by reducing federal spending and paring down the over $35 trillion of national debt. Unfortunately, they want to get rid of this debt by causing more inflation and ruining the purchasing power of Americans, which makes us feel like we're on a treadmill and we can't keep up. The harder we work, the more the government promises people free stuff, which increases inflation and makes it difficult for us to move towards retirement. So, President Biden's proposed fiscal year 2025 budget fails to cut spending. Yeah, it's unsurprising. Republicans won't do it either for the most part. Some of the libertarian leaning folks will, but it's not the norm, and that's really unfortunate. It also proposes the government borrow nearly $2 trillion a year for the next decade. Oh my goodness. We need a Paul or a Millay to come into government immediately. Hopefully, Trump will get reelected and take a page from Millay's book and just start dramatically cutting government bloat, bureaucracy, and corruption. I would love to see it happen. Big spending budget deal, dead on arrival. The fact is that with few exceptions, Republicans are just as addicted to welfare warfare spending as their Democratic counterparts. Ain't that the truth? Nobody's really making an argument against that these days. All right, so go ahead and read the rest of this article on Newsmax. It's pretty great. And I always love to read something new from Ron Paul. If you like this sort of content, please consider liking, subscribing. Becoming a paid subscriber makes it easier for me to focus more on these newsletters like the Rand Paul Review and bring more content to you. So have a great day.